ready. I call this meeting of the Rent Stabilization Commission to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving on to item 3, Ms. Brino, may we have a roll call?
Commissioner Kerpes, Commissioner Bergstein,
Here.
Commissioner O'Keefe, here, Commissioner Maggio,
Present.
Commissioner Topshian,
Here.
Vice Chair Gregor, here, Chair Charity.
Here. Thank you. Moving on from item 3 to item 4, approval of the agenda. Commissioners, having reviewed tonight's agenda, do you have any changes to it or a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve the agenda for this evening, October the 25th.
Second.
Thank you very much. All those in favor, can you say aye?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Thank you very much. The motion carries. Moving on from item 4 to item 5, approval of the minutes of our last meeting. Having reviewed the minutes of our last meeting, does anyone have any changes or a motion to approve them?
Move to approve as submitted.
Second.
Thanks very much. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Thanks very much. The minutes are approved. Moving on from item 5 to item 6, public comment. Do we have any public comment this evening? No? Thanks very much. Moving on from item 6 to item 7, our manager's report. At this time, Mr. Noonan, may we have our staff report?
Thank you. Good evening. Looking at the Commission's agenda look ahead, we do have 2 meetings remaining in the year. We do not have any appeals scheduled for the upcoming meeting, which is on November 8th. We do have 2 appeals scheduled for the December 13th meeting.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments for staff?
I do. Peter, there was an article in WehoTV today about a new app called Pave Mint, which is allowing private residents to rent out their parking spaces at their residences. I know I had called staff a couple of months ago pertaining to a neighbor of mine who no longer drives, wanted to know if they could rent out their parking space, and staff clarified they could rent it only to someone in their building. So I wonder if maybe you could look into this and maybe talk to, I don't know if it's Dan Mick, I'm not sure who's at Code Compliance, to find out if the renting of personal parking spaces at your residence is going to be allowable. Thank you.
Commissioners, any further comment on the manager's report? No? Okay, so we can move on to, from item 7 to item 8, commission comments. I had one. I just wanted to commend Commissioner O'Keefe and Commissioner Bergstein for staying up at the last council meeting and offering your public comment on the pass-through and that procedure. I was there for the whole, I know it was late, but I appreciated hearing what both of you had to say and just wanted to say that I heard you. Mm-hmm. And also to the staff, I know that it didn't pass, but if they did have anything for us with, looking at net operating income or any, direction they wanted from the Rent Stabilization Commission, I think I would be happy to, research or do whatever the City Council asked of us. So,
If procedurally, if it didn't pass, does it mean that the City Council may send it back to us for any idea, any additional suggestions?
Let's follow up at the end of the meeting with a couple of comments.
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
I'd like to make mention of the City Council taking action on Prop 10, and that we do not have to do that. However, in our email that we did get from legal counsel, that we can discuss it under our own commission's comments, which I certainly appreciate. Thank you.
Any further comments? Okay, so we'll move on from item 8 to item 9, our appeals this evening. We'll start with Appeal 9A, D-4337. This is at 1139 3/4 North Vista Street. And before hearing this appeal, we'll hear our staff report from our legal counsel, Allison Regan.
Thank you. Joel Mark was granted a rent reduction for the landlord's failure to perform required maintenance, specifically living room paint and window coverings. The landlord appeals those rent reductions on the grounds that the landlord and tenant agreed on the condition of the paint and that it was in perfect condition. The landlord also argues that the tenant changed both the living room and the kitchen window coverings on his own about 30 years ago, and so is now not entitled to a rent reduction. Staff recommends that the commission affirm the hearing examiner's decision to award rent reductions. The reduction for the paint is reasonably supported by the rent reduction since it's over 37 years old, and the tenant testified that the paint is in good condition only. With respect to the window coverings in the living room, there's no dispute that those window coverings are a housing service for this tenancy and were there when the tenant moved in, and it's also undisputed that these particular coverings have not been replaced in 37 years. Thus, the hearing examiner correctly ordered a rent reduction until those coverings are replaced. With respect to the kitchen window coverings, the landlord also argues that the tenant changed the window coverings on his own. And while it is true that the tenant did change those, that occurred over 30 years ago. And so per the maintenance requirements, those are also due to be replaced. And so the hearing examiner's findings are supported by the record evidence, and staff recommends that they be upheld. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Regan. Do we have any questions about this appeal from staff before moving forward? Okay, thank you. So this appeal was filed by Levi Goldman. Is Levi present this evening or any representative for the apartment complex? No. Is the tenant present? Joel Mark. Hi, Joel. Thank you very much. So Joel, as the person who filed this appeal isn't present, you'll have 5 uninterrupted minutes to present your side to us. When you begin speaking, please just state your name, and you'll be able to get timed by our secretary.
Thank you. I'm Joel Mark. I'm the resident of West Hollywood, and I came here to say that the landlord did change the window coverings, did paint the living room. It was an adequate job. The coverings are excellent, and did several other maintenances on the apartment that were not required but appreciated. I would not have gotten any of this taken care of if it wasn't for the mechanism that the city of West Hollywood provides to allow a tenant like myself to do this, to have my say. So again, thank the city of West Hollywood. I want to thank the commissioners, and say that the terms of the agreements have been met, and the quality of the window coverings are excellent. So that's it.
Thanks very much.
That's it.
Commissioners, do you have any comments for Mr. Mark?
Just a quick question. So when did the owner complete the painting and everything?
Yesterday.
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 All right.
Yes, I was able to negotiate with the painter. They wanted to do it all, the living room and the kitchen at the same time. I was able to negotiate with the painter to do the kitchen first, but they didn't. They actually did the kitchen, and then move everything out of the kitchen, paint back, and then have several days to disassemble the living room, which is also my workspace, and get everything out of there and dispersed into my bedroom and my neighbor's garage.
Good. It's good to see that you are satisfied, it seems like, with the
Yes,
work is
surprisingly so.
That's great.
I just have a question. I'm very curious, sir, why you waited 37 years to ask for your...
Well, who knows? I mean, I got busy. I got used to it. There were other problems. There was mold. There was mold in the bathroom, which was mitigated a few years ago and really wasn't mitigated. I called the health department earlier in the spring. They came out and did a partial job of mitigating it. I put a call into the health department again today for the rest of it. But I was surprised. They actually put in a new screen for me. They did other things that I was not expecting.
Okay, and that's great. And I just want to tell you there is an ordinance 17.56.010, which requires all rental units at a minimum shall be painted no less than once every 4 years.
I know, but
So this time you won't have to wait 37 years.
I hope not. But if I have the same painter again, I'll wait.
37 years, all right.
Yeah, I'm cleaning up stuff on the floor that wasn't covered, so I can move my stuff back in.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I'm basically certain I understood correctly, but so the kitchen painting's done, the window coverings are done, and the living room is going to be done soon but isn't yet painted, right?
The painting has been done. I'm just cleaning up after the painter, and then there'll be some touch-up, like I said. They had to put on 3 coats of paint because the old paint the previous tenant did a very dark varnish stain, so it was glossy. So it took 3 coats to cover.
I'm so glad to hear it was resolved.
Thank you.
Anything further, commissioners?
Just a question for the council. The owner can file for a compliance determination at this point, right?
Correct. It doesn't affect the decision you're to make tonight, but what the owner will do is file a request for a compliance determination and show that they've completed the work.
Okay. Thank you.
So at this time, Mr. Mark, thank you. We'll go into our commissioner deliberation on the matter.
Thank you.
Would any commissioners like to start deliberating? Thank you.
Look, I think the facts before us are pretty clear. The living room coverings hadn't been replaced in 37 years, and the kitchen hadn't been in 30 years. You know, and the paint, gosh, I don't even know what it said in the record, but it's been so many years, there's no question that it was time to do this scheduled maintenance. Therefore, it seems like the facts before us are such that there's no doubt that we should affirm the hearing examiner's decision in full.
Just like to add for the public who may be watching tonight that a landlord is required to paint every 4 years and carpet every 7 years. But I concur with Commissioner Gregoire.
Just want to add that I'm pleased to see a satisfied resident with the process, how the process worked, and that's great. That's really rewarding to know that the tenants, when they go through the procedure, they get a really good resolution and they want to comply. That's also a great news for us. And I'm in agreement with the commissioners and with the staff recommendation to affirm the examiner's decision.
Anything further, commissioners? Okay. Is anybody ready to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution of the Rent Stabilization Commission of the City of West Hollywood affirming the hearing examiner's decision on application D-4337 pertaining to the property address 1139 3/4 North Vista Street.
And I'll second that motion, Commissioner Topchian. Ms. Secretary Barino, may we have a roll call?
Commissioner Kerpes?
Aye.
Commissioner Bergstein?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Keefe?
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio?
Aye.
Commissioner Topchian?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gregoire?
Aye.
Chair Charity?
Aye. Thank you very much. The motion passes unanimously. Mr. Mark, if you have any questions about this appeal, you can refer to staff, and they'll be more than kind to assist you. Thank you.
Joel, I just wanted to make a comment. While it was part of our record tonight, although not at issue, was the issue of secondhand smoke drifting from a neighbor. You can stay seated. From a neighbor's unit into yours. I'm not sure if you're aware that this commission undertook a study and has made a recommendation to City Council that they further study smoke-free housing for our rent-stabilized units. I don't know if it's yet on the City Council calendar. If not, I would hazard a guess that this year it will. So if you send me a text or an email, I'll try and remember to let you know what comes before council. The more voices in favor of smoke-free housing, the better. Thank you.
So at this time, we'll be moving from 9A to 9B. The appeal on D-4344 pertains to the apartment 1000 Palm Drive, Unit 1. And I do believe we have a recusal for this appeal.
Because of my financial interest in this, I shall recuse myself.
Yeah, fire alarm. I'm assuming we need to evacuate.
I'll just continue my leave, okay?
Okay.
Hopefully everyone at home also practice their evacuation.
Okay, our meeting is back in session. We're currently on item 9B, Appeal D-4344. Commissioner Maggio has recused himself from this, and we are now on to our staff report from Ms. Regan.
Thank you. The hearing examiner awarded a rent reduction to Leonard Cachola of $110 for the removal of a parking space. The landlord has appealed and argues that the tenant's lease does not provide for parking, so that there was no elimination of a housing service. Staff recommends that the commission affirm the hearing examiner's decision. There's substantial evidence in the record supporting the findings that on-site parking was a housing service provided by the landlord to the tenant, and that it has since been eliminated without a corresponding reduction in rent. I would also like to mention that staff had received a voicemail message from Jeff David, who purports to be a representative of the owner, saying that they were withdrawing their appeal. They didn't do so formally, but I wanted to alert the commission that we did receive that communication.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any question for Ms. Regan?
I just would ask that if you could go into a little explanation, because I had a hard time wrapping my head around on page 108 of our report. It says that the terms of the lease are not controlling, because that form lease that they initially used said, if I think what was the language? When and if a resident is assigned a parking space, which is weird language to begin with, and then the line underneath that, which would normally be the place where they would indicate parking space number B or whatever, was just left blank. There was no slash through it. So there was nothing in the original lease that indicated there was a parking, but we have all this documentation after that, really starting, I think, in 2011, at least to me, is very clear that at some point in time, but I was just curious about that language of why the terms of the lease, the original lease, were not controlling, why this later documentation kind of superseded that.
It's not that, it's that all of the evidence needs to be looked at together to determine what actual housing services are provided. And so the rent stabilization ordinance defines a housing service as either what's in the re-registration form, or the lease provides some clues, and also what's actually provided. So if a housing service is actually provided, even if it's contradicted by the lease, the hearing examiner or the commission can decide that there is sufficient evidence one way or the other to show that the housing service was in fact provided.
And it's also because I think this was an open and obvious usage of that parking space. Would that also kind of factor into, even though the lease was signed, that it was not that it was somebody was sneaking in and taking a housing service they weren't entitled to. It was granted by an authority and openly used. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Kind of as a follow-up to, not a follow-up, but maybe related to that question, does it mean that if the service is not indicated in the rental agreement, but the service was not available at the time of renting and was provided later on, it still constitutes a landlord-provided housing service, even if it was not on day one?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Commissioners, anything further? Okay, very well. I want to check with the audience in general. Do we have Carolyn David present? No. Do we have Leonard Cachola present? Thank you very much. If you would like to speak, you can have 5 uninterrupted minutes to present your side of the case. Very good. So you can start at any time, and staff will give you a time when you're done speaking. Please state your name, and you can begin.
Hi, Leonard Cachola, it's my name, and I'm West Hollywood resident. Okay. I want to start off by thanking you for your time and attention to this matter. I support both the rent stabilization staff report's recommendation and the hearing examiner's decision on this case. In 2001, I moved into 1000 Palm and was allowed by on-site management to park in the lot. In 2011, I was assigned a parking space by on-site management. In 2017, when a security gate was installed at 1000 Palm, I was given remote access to my assigned space by on-site management, and finally, on May 3rd, 2018, parking was removed by Ms. David without my consent from my tenancy following a rent overcharge hearing. Although I testified parking was not explicitly included in my original lease, Ms. David's appeal ignores the fact there is no language in the lease that says I can or cannot park in the lot. Ms. David's appeal also ignores the fact the original lease did not assign a parking space because there were no assigned parking spaces when I signed the agreement. And Ms. David's appeal ignores the fact that from the onset of my tenancy in 2001 until I was assigned a parking space by on-site management in September 2011, parking was provided to all tenants, including myself, on a first-come, first-served basis. This fact was supported by Ms. David in her own testimony. In her appeal, Ms. David states my parking space was mistakenly assigned for 3 months. Even if a parking space was mistakenly assigned to me for 3 months, as Ms. David claimed in her appeal, it does not change the fact I parked in the lot continuously from the onset of my tenancy until May 3rd, 2018. In her appeal, Ms. David claims I showed no evidence I ever negotiated for parking. Since there were no disputes over my parking in the lot prior to May 3rd, 2018, there were no negotiations, thus no evidence of negotiations. In her appeal, Ms. David claims my rent was never increased for being allowed to park in the lot. While I do not dispute the fact my rent was never increased, she ignores the fact this was never an issue in the 17 years prior to May 3rd, 2018. In her appeal, Ms. David states I should not receive a credit for the removal of this housing service. This is not an in-store credit for a defective product I decided to return. This is a rent decrease allowed per West Hollywood Municipal Code when parking is removed from a tenancy. The fact is, at no point was my parking in the 1000 Palm lot ever contested or called a mistake by either on-site management or Ms. David from the onset of my tenancy in 2001 until the rent overcharge hearing on May 3rd, 2018 that ruled in my favor. In fact, the only time Ms. David called my parking in the lot a mistake was at the May 15 parking hearing and in her appeal. Retroactively calling my parking in the lot a mistake does not change the fact I was provided a housing service for 17 years and has now been removed from my tenancy without my consent. In closing, West Hollywood Municipal Code 17.52.120, prohibiting the removal of parking, is very clear that I, as a tenant, should have my rent decreased for the removal of this housing service unless it is restored, as ordered in the hearing decision. Again, thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks very much, Mr. Cochola. Before you leave the podium, I just wanted to ask any commissioners, do you have any questions for Mr. Cochola? No? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move on to commissioners' deliberation. Would anybody like to start?
Thank you, Chair. There's no doubt in my mind, based on the review of the evidence submitted, that the examiner reached a correct conclusion, a determination that the parking was part of the was a service provided to the tenant, part of the rent. So, and the documentation submitted prove it. Thank you, the legal counsel, for the clarification. So it doesn't have to be provided on day one. If the service is provided to the tenant, it becomes a part of the rent that the tenant pays for the services, which will be subject to rent decrease if a service is removed later on. So therefore, I'm prepared to obviously support the staff's recommendation in this matter. And I just, when it comes to the parking issue, I always want to remind that this city, West Hollywood, the city's rent stabilization ordinance takes it very seriously, and parking, if provided as a housing service, is an inseparable part of the rental unit in our city, so it cannot be removed. So I think the both tenants and landlords should know that, should be aware of that. And with that said, I'm prepared to support this recommendation. Thank you.
I just wanted to add, in the documents, we saw your emails back and forth with your landlord, and these things can get pretty heated and adversarial, and I thought you showed a lot of restraint and professionalism in communicating with your landlord, and as you are going to continue to live there, that you do have to maintain that relationship, and I just wanted to say that I thought you did show a lot of professionalism and courtesy, even with having a disagreement, and I'm also prepared to support this recommendation.
I would also be in support of the resolution. This is from my time on the commission, one of the clearest paper trail or electronic mail records of what transpired. It was not really our prior case, they said that, it hadn't been paid in 37 years. Landlord could have argued that they did, and this one, to me, there is no dispute. There is a paper trail starting from 2011 where that parking space was assigned. So this is a relatively easy one for me to decide on, and I'll be voting in favor of the hearing examiner's decision.
Should be ready to make a motion.
I support the recommendation. I'm prepared to support a motion.
Okay. I'll make a motion for Resolution RSC 18-536, a resolution of the Rent Stabilization Commission of the City of West Hollywood affirming the hearing examiner's decision on D-4344 pertaining to apartment 1000 Palm Avenue, Unit 1.
Second.
Thank you very much. Ms. Brano, may we have a roll call?
Commissioner Kerpes,
Aye.
Commissioner Bergstein,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Keefe,
Aye.
Commissioner Topchian,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gregor,
Aye.
Chair Charity.
Aye. Thank you very much. The motion passes. Mr. Cochola, if you have any questions, you can direct them to staff, and they'll be able to help you out. Before moving forward, I'm going to go retrieve Commissioner Maggio, and we'll continue. Okay, thank you. At this time, we're moving on from 9B to item 10, unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business with anyone? Okay, we're moving on from item 10 to item 11, an update from our ad hoc subcommittee.
We have not met since our last meeting. We were talking about maybe meeting again on December 13th, immediately prior to the second from next meeting of this commission. Would that work for staff at 6 p.m. on December 13th?
That would work for staff.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner O'Keefe. We'll move on from item 11 to item 12, public comments. I don't believe we have any public comment. Moving on from item 12 to item 13, commission comments.
Yes, first I would like to announce I became a great uncle for the 7th time today. 7 pounds, 15 ounces, and her name is Paige, and she was born at Cedar Sinai. The second item is, remember that old saying, I kind of tricked the chair and the vice chair, don't leave what? Without it?
Don't leave home without it.
Don't leave home without it. And I'm delighted we have new ordinances and regulations, and I think they're important that we always have them with us, especially when we're here at this meeting. Thank you, staff. Did you do that, Peter?
Thanks very much. Any further commission comments?
I just want to encourage everybody to get out and vote next on Election Day, and please vote yes on Proposition 10.
Anything further, commissioners? Okay, we'll move on from commission comments to item 14, staff comments.
Just wanted to give the commission a little update on the last council meeting. We did bring the commission's recommendation on a cost-sharing approach for seismic retrofitting forward to the council. We provided that along with an alternative recommendation, which would be to use the existing code language that applies to unreinforced masonry buildings now. That is in it's 17.48. And the council did receive that, considered it, and recognized that, in its opinion, the retrofitting is a building, a maintenance, and an expected maintenance for building owners, and so did opt for the alternative recommendation, which would be to use the existing code with 2 changes that would have to happen, one of which is to apply the language to the current building types, which are the soft story buildings, and I guess 3, apologize, the unreinforced concrete and then pre-Northridge steel. The second item would be to review and adjust the base year date, which right now is set at 1983 in the code. So those items will come back, and I'm going to talk to our legal services, to Jonathan Hollub, see if we could bring that back at your November 8th meeting. You don't have any appeals scheduled that night, but that would, if the commission reviewed those changes, which are in fact fairly small, we would then go ahead and schedule that item potentially for the council on December 17th, which is also the night that we will be bringing forward a buyout agreement program for the council to consider. The other item that was before the council at the last meeting was the habitability plan requirement for major construction, seismic construction, rather. It has a provision in it as well that allows the city to pull a permit if in fact under major construction it comes to light that the situation is intolerable, uninhabitable for tenants. That item was put on consent and passed on first reading. The second reading is coming forward at the next meeting, and so that will be in effect and in place within 30 days after. Those are my comments. I don't know if, Allison, if you had any other comments. That's it from staff.
I have a quick question. Since we don't have any appeals scheduled for the November 8th meeting, if staff were to have one ready, is it possible we could discuss one of our priority items?
If you had a suggestion, you feel free to send me separately send me an email with your thoughts. We'll see if we can put something together. Certainly, we're planning to have that one code amendment, but we could have time for another item, potentially.
Fellow commissioners, any thoughts?
I like the idea, but I can't remember offhand which ones I would.
I'll send out the priority list so everyone has that fresh, and feel free, if you have thoughts, just shoot me a quick email back.
Thank you.
A quick one, Manager Noonan. At the beginning, I mentioned about the possibility of some of the issues discussed at the council regarding the seismic retrofit coming back to us. It's not going to happen. It's unlikely.
The only one that's going to come back to you are the ones that the council directed, which are the two that Peter mentioned.
Okay. Well, probably we have to watch the video from that meeting, because I really want to know the council's kind of a comments or maybe made regarding those issues that we discussed here and recommended to the council. I'm curious how the council, agreed or not, or
Yeah,
things were
definitely
discussed.
review the recording.
Yeah. And that's the reason why I'm glad the commissioners attended. That's the reason why I didn't go there, because I thought, what if that issues will come back to us? I didn't want to have a potential kind of a conflict situation. So then that's the reason why I didn't go there. But I'm very interested in watching and to see what happened there.
I know that when I made my comments, part of my preamble was to state that I was not there as a member of the Rent Stabilization Commission or speaking on behalf. I was there as a private citizen, as a landlord, so hopefully we
So
negate
you
any
have
kind of
different
conflict.
shoes, yeah. But thank you, Chair and the Commissioner, for attending. It's great. Thank you.
You'll see this in the recording, and hopefully I'm not misstating it, but some of the council members did express a desire to potentially help people if there ended up being increases in rent as a result of it. Am I recalling correctly?
Yeah, they had also asked for a couple other items, one of which is to look at adjusting the deadlines if there was an issue. And in fact, there is some allowance for that in the seismic retrofitting ordinances that were passed. So we have that in place. And another item, there was a suggestion to look at waiving the annual registration fees and portions of those. So we were planning on that same night, on December 17th, along with the buyout agreements, to bring back more information on that. The council also suggested waiving the plan check fees, and I had mistakenly thought that the building official said that they did that already, so we have to correct that because we don't. But we wanted to come back and with a full disclosure of what those impacts would be. Some of those fees, in fact, would be fairly significant if they were waived. So we will have that as a separate piece going forward.
And will that go straight to council, or would that be presented here first?
Yeah, fees go straight to council, yeah.
Anything further, commissioners, on the staff report?
So with that, we move on to adjournment. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is November 8th. This adjourns our meeting. Thank you.